Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. All right, we have more or less turned our attention with the New York Giants to the future, which means we've turned our attention to the 2025 NFL draft, to whatever the Giants are going to do to find a quarterback of the future. And here to help me discuss the draft is one of the best draft analysts out there, and a guy that somehow in all the years he and I have been doing these things, somehow we've never managed to cross paths, never managed to do one of these before. Today I've got Luke Easterling of Athlon Sports on the show. Luke, thank you for finally hopping on here.
My pleasure, Ed. Glad to finally meet in
Of
our
course,
various capacities here. Excited to talk some ball with you, man.
of course, when I say that, it was nice of me to finally reach out. So so that one's on me. But here we are. Let's talk a little Giants. And before we deep dive into the draft, just a sort of an aside, the Giants are 2-12. I have admitted that I felt optimistic about this team entering 2024. I couldn't have I didn't see 2-12 coming. I could have seen a 5 or 6 win season coming. Um, are you just looking at it, from the outside, from what the Giants have collected talent wise over the last couple of years? Are you surprised to see this team sitting at 2-12 and fighting for the first overall pick?
I am a little bit. I think there's definitely too much talent. I wouldn't call them the most talented team in the league, obviously, but I think there's too many good players for them to be this bad, if that makes sense. I think even with guys like Tyrone Tracy that have popped as like a rookie surprise, and obviously you bring in Malik Neighbors. I didn't expect them to be this bad for the whole season. Obviously seasons are long and you have dips and here and there, and everybody has to play through tough stretches, but they've just been so much worse than I think they should have been. Again, I saw a 5 or 6 win team, and it's pretty rough to see the way things have gone for them.
Absolutely. And we'll see what happens here with the coach and the GM and the changes that get made. But let's get into the draft a little bit. And it's crystal clear that the need for the Giants is quarterback. In your most recent mock draft, the Giants are sitting at number 2. In your most recent mock draft, you have the Raiders, who are at 1. According to Tankathon anyway. NFL.com still
Right.
has the Giants at 1, but that's not counting the rest of the games that need to be played. So we're going with the Tankathon draft order. You have the Raiders taking Shadur Sanders. You have the Giants taking Cam Ward. And clearly, I mean, is that how you see these two quarterbacks at this point, as 1 and 2? And that's pretty much how you think it's just going to shake out?
Yeah, I mean, I see them as 1 and 2 in the quarterback class, and just nobody else close. Personally, I think that's a little bit misleading in terms of how they rank in terms of just a general ranking. They might go 1 and 2 in the draft. For me at this point, they're very borderline first round picks. Period. If you just kind of take their grades that I have on them right now in a vacuum, but the quarterback position is just too important, and that's how these guys always get drafted a little bit higher than maybe their just general grade would suggest. But that's kind of how I feel about them. They're 1A and 1B at this point. I think they do a lot of the same things well. I think they have a lot of both mental and physical traits that will translate to the next level. I really love their ability to create plays out of structure. I believe they have enough arm talent to succeed at the next level. I think they've got that just clutch, big play gene, whatever it is, those instincts to make plays and just make the right throws and extend things and come up with that highlight reel play. I think they're really great leaders. Anybody that plays with them in those locker rooms at Miami and Colorado will probably say the same thing. They have a lot of attractive traits. For me, it's just if you were to compare them, say to last year's class where you had three guys at the top who were all bona fide number one overall, top five talent type of prospects. They're nowhere near that just because I feel like the consistency just isn't there in terms of the accuracy, the decision making, the physical traits aren't at the elite level like we saw from Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels and Drake May. But just certainly enough there to where if a team is just so desperate for a quarterback like the Raiders and the Giants are, that position just makes such a difference. And if you don't get one of those two guys in this class, I just feel like everybody else in this class, this quarterback class, has even more questions than answers. And that's why you kind of got to swing for the fences and hope one of these two guys can hit their ceiling.
But you think if they hit their ceilings that these two guys can be successful?
Oh, absolutely. And again, football is the greatest team sport for a reason. You have to build a team around them to allow them to reach that potential. I think what you're seeing, from Caleb Williams in Chicago is a prime example of how that can how that can be a detriment to a quarterback. And they did the same thing to Justin Fields. The quarterback success at the next level is so much about what's around them in terms of the coaching staff and the talent around them on the roster in terms of reaching that ceiling. But in terms of the tools that they bring to the table, absolutely, I think both Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders are more than capable of not just being quality starters at the next level, but being really, really successful ones. Again, mostly just because they have the mental makeup and they have that just knack for making those explosive plays, taking those chances down the field. I feel like it'll take a little patience at the next level, and it will take the right supporting cast. But both of these guys have all those traits to be successful.
I need to ask you about the Dion Sanders factor when it comes to the Giants. Now, I saw this morning in prime time talking to Adam Pac-Man Jones on his podcast. He said flat out, he said Shedeur is going to be the number one pick, which I don't think anybody doubts. But he also said if the Giants have that number one pick, there's no way they're giving it up. They're taking Shedeur. I'm not so sure about that just because I know the Mara family well enough to know that, they've drafted some guys over the years and brought some guys in who turned out to be distractions and sideshows and all of that. But I don't think they've ever done it intentionally. I don't think they've ever done it on purpose. And I just don't know, how the Mara family would feel about, drafting Shedeur and bringing, whether he's part of the organization or behind the scenes or whatever, that Dion's going to have a voice. He's going to have opinions. If he doesn't like what he sees, he's not only going to say that, behind the scenes to the Mara family and whoever the coach is, but that's going to become public. And I don't know, just what's your feeling about whether the Giants are going to want to deal with that?
I think that I don't think you're wrong in that, Dion's going to be himself, and that is always going to be the case, and you're going to have to. It's always you're going to have to be aware of that. Obviously, going into the situation, like you said, if you take Shedeur Sanders, you have to know that you're willingly putting yourself in that situation where Dion's going to be present. And again, I don't think all of that is a bad thing. I think he's as a coach and particularly as a father, I love to see his involvement in that way. I like to see. I know it might be some people might think it's too much, but I've even just growing up playing sports, I saw way too many parents who treated their kids in a negative way when it came to the game, especially those that coached their kids. If I played on their teams and watched the way they behaved, so like I feel like Dion's like overwhelming, maybe even over the top positivity when it comes to kind of hyping his voice up. That's refreshing to me. I know, again, it might seem like it's a bit much to some people, but I kind of like it. And particularly when it comes to making the decision at quarterback, here's what I'll say. If you're the owner of an NFL franchise and you genuinely want what's best for your team, that means you've got to have the guts to take the best player and deal with whatever you might perceive as a distraction. You got to be able to handle all that, because if you genuinely evaluate these two quarterbacks at the top and say they end up with the number one pick and they get to have their choice, right? If you say, man, we really think Shador is the better player, but we really don't want to deal with Dion and what we think might be this sideshow thing or this distraction. So we're going to take Cam Ward instead. If you take a player that you don't think is as good just because you think his dad's going to be like a distract, like that's weak to me. Like that's scared to me. That's punting the ball on 4th and inches from the 39-yard line and just like, nah, I don't know. I don't want to, I don't want to risk going for the first down. Like that's not how I would run an NFL franchise. I don't think. I want the best players in the building. I will trust that's why I hire the right coach. That's why I put the right leaders in that locker room. That's why I, as an owner, embrace if I'm bringing that, if he's going to be my quarterback, I'm going to go to Dion and be like, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to embrace this involvement that you have. We want you to be a part of this. We want you to be a vocal supporter and proponent of our franchise. You've got to look at the positive sides of that and not play scared. In my opinion, that's kind of how I would approach it.
Interesting. Do you agree at all with the sentiment that some people have that because he's been coached by his father and all of that there's a little bit of a sense of entitlement with Shador? Do you agree with that in any way?
I think that's just grasping at straws in a way that, like, how do you substantiate that? Like, how would you, until he gets in another building and he's coached by someone else at the next level, and you get like, I think that there's a lot of guys that probably bring some entitlement to the next level, and some of that might be unavoidable. Your dad's a Hall of Fame, football player. He's a legend. There might be certain experiences that you haven't had to have because that was your experience. That's the kind of stuff I can't get hung up on when I'm evaluating guys. Like, I want to know who the player is. I'd like to know who, as best I can. It's hard to in the media how he is as a person. But to get into that conversation about, oh, he's entitled because his dad has made things easier for him. Like, listen, that happens all over the place at all times. I don't know that I would want to put that much weight on that in terms of evaluating whether or not I think this guy can be my franchise quarterback. I just feel like it's a little too much of a moving target in terms of how do I define that, and if I can't really put my finger on it, how do I really let that negatively impact my evaluation of this guy? I don't know that I could do that.
It's a little bit like, as you've been talking about it, I think a little bit about the Giants' decision that they made last spring. And we won't get into the quarterback part of that yet, but basically, when they decided not to go quarterback, you're looking at Malik Neighbors versus Rome Odunze, and I loved Rome Odunze. I love, what he did at the combine. I love his talent. I love a lot of things about him. But, Malik Neighbors has a somewhat better skill set. He just comes with more personality that you have to deal with. And it's similar, I guess. That's the same kind of decision the Giants made last year. I don't know if you see the same kind of similarity there. It struck me as you were talking about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it shows a pattern of not being afraid of that stuff. You'd be like, listen, if we think, and what's funny is I had Odunze slightly ahead of Neighbors. They were Harrison, Odunze, and Neighbors were 1, 2, 3 on my board overall. Top 3 players in the entire draft at the same position. I've never seen a receiver class like we had last year, both in terms of the elite talent at the top and the overall depth of those first few tiers. But I thought that Odunze is the more complete player, but I think that Neighbors has the trump card in terms of the explosiveness and the big playability. So I understand why he went ahead of him. But I agree with you. I think that it just shows that, like, listen, we're not going to get hung up on any of this exterior stuff or this ancillary, I feel like they're like amoebas thing. It's hard to really like define how that impacts a player and his ability to be successful. You turn on the tape and you see the type of player he is. That's what you want in your building. They clearly made that type of choice with Malik Neighbors, which might, like you said, indicate that they wouldn't be afraid to do it again.
I don't think they would be either. The more I think about it, I think if Joe Shane and Brian Daboll get to make this decision, I think the Neighbors decision showed they're not afraid to deal with personality. I also think making Kayvon Thibodeau their first overall pick back in 2022, a guy who some people shied away from his personality, and whether that pick has worked out for the Giants is debatable because I don't think he's given you the value you'd hope for from a fifth overall pick. But I think again it shows that this regime is maybe not afraid of taking on that personality if they think the player can help them.
Well, and I'll point to Neighbors in particular and say that he could have been a hell of a lot bigger of a distraction this year if he wanted to be, with the way things have gone. I know he said a couple of things here and there, but like if he really wanted to to make it clear what a you know what show has gone on in there this season, how frustrating it's been to be as talented as he is and have to deal with the quarterback situation, have to deal with the play calling at times and the scheming at times, and just deal with the losing over and
Mhm.
over and over again. He could have said a lot more and been a lot more of a problem, and he wasn't. And then on the flip side, he has been the genuine article as a player. I mean, it didn't take long to notice that, like, oh, he's that dude. Like, he is going to be that type of impact player at the next level. So he has lived up already to the billing as a player, and he hasn't, in my opinion, been as much of a distraction as he probably could have been, and justifiably so, if we're probably being
Right.
honest. So I think, if anything, they could look at that pick and say, oh, we need to keep doing that. We need to keep taking the players we believe are the difference makers, instead of being worried that, oh, if things don't go well or things don't go their way, they're going to be a problem. Because Malik could have made it a lot worse, and he didn't. And he's giving us what we expected on the football field. That could encourage them to continue, with that philosophy when it comes to taking the top talent.
That's a really good point, Luke. Let's get into the idea of whether or not Joe Shane and Brian Daboll should stay on and should be given the opportunity to find their own quarterback, develop their own quarterback. That, of course, is a big topic here in New York, New Jersey. Um, it's it's historically bad for the Giants this year, but we also know that the Giants have changed coaches, changed GMs, ripped apart this organization a couple times and tried to start over. And there are arguments, and I've made both of these arguments at Big Blue View. There's the argument for keeping these guys, giving them the chance to develop their own quarterback. To me, they've never really had that opportunity because they were handed Daniel Jones. Um, and when I look at 2022, they had no choice after 2022 but to continue with Jones, after making the playoffs. So you can make the argument that they deserve the right to pick their own quarterback. The flip side of that argument is what's going on with the Chicago Bears, what's going on the last 2 years with the Carolina Panthers. It's actually what went on for 5.5 years, three coaches and two GMs with Daniel Jones. So, where do you land on not necessarily whether Joe Shane and Brian Daboll are good at their jobs, but where do you land on what's the best decision if they're going to take Shadur Sanders or if they're going to take Cam Ward and start over? What's the best decision for that young quarterback? Is it starting over with a new coach, with a new GM, or is it giving Daboll and Shane an opportunity to see what they can do with the kid?
I mean, I think that really all comes down to what you think you can replace them with. Because I think if you're confident that you can identify and go get the guys that you want, if you're going to replace them, because it's easy all day to say, oh, let's just fire these guys and get somebody else. Well, you got to make sure you can get somebody better,
Mhm.
and be confident in that. And so the Bears situation is a great example, because I do feel like they missed the opportunity. They're doing this a year too late, right? You should have gone into that offseason with a clear new direction, like, hey, we're going to take Caleb Williams. We're going to bring in a coaching staff that is built to, develop him and, move on in at that, all at the same time, right? And I feel like now it's disjointed, and they basically lost a year, in my opinion. I don't know if the Giants are in the exact same position, but it does kind of I think if I were to look at this in a way, I think that the organization might is try to say, listen, it's not about whether or not these these two guys deserve the right to pick their own quarterback. Like we can't be as past focused as we are future focused. The key is if we identify one of these two quarterbacks, or we're going to go that direction, are these the two guys that we believe can get the best out of him and put a winning team around him? Or do we feel like we have better options out on the open market in terms of the head coach, the general manager, organizationally, to not not necessarily like punish them for what they did or didn't do in terms of team building and coaching beforehand, but it's all about looking forward and saying, did they give us the best chance to A, develop this quarterback into a successful starter, and B, build the team around him that we require, or do we feel like we have a better chance elsewhere? I think that's what it's got to come down to. You can't weigh too heavily what's happened already. You have to look at what's ahead and think, okay, now this is the team we do have. Who do we identify as the cornerstone players that we want to build around? You know, the Malik Neighbors, the Dexter Lawrences, those types of guys, and say, hey, regardless of how they got here, we can't let that color whether or not we believe these two guys are the right people to lead us into the next generation with this new quarterback. And that's going to be a tough decision because they're going to have competition for those top names, the coaches, the general managers, those types of guys. They're not going to be the only team looking for those guys, and they're going to have something to sell, and so that's going to make it an interesting decision.
And I think that I agree with that. I think it has to be a future focused decision. It can't be focused on, well, you made this mistake. You made a Barkley mistake. You made this mistake. You drafted this wrong guy. Evan Neal's a bust, whatever. It is what it is at this point. Those things happened. It has to be a future focused decision based on what they think is best for the next quarterback. And I think the issue, like you said, is you've got Joe Shane sitting here, and 3 years ago, Joe Shane was the hot guy on the market, and Brian Daboll was the hot head coaching candidate on the market. He was Ben Johnson 3 years ago. And you took the hot guys, and so far it hasn't worked. Well, although it kind of worked in 2022, although that might have worked against you in the long run. So you're going to take another untested general manager, or you're going to take one who failed somewhere else, or you're going to take one who's built, or you're going to stay with what you've got. And it's the same with Daboll. Can you find a guy, if you're going to keep Joe Shane, for example, can you find another guy that can work with Joe? So I find it to be a really tough, really fascinating decision. Now I'm going to ask you to vote. Which way is it going to come down?
I personally don't see them returning. I think I'm more confident that they will have a new head coach than necessarily a general manager. But my experience in covering this league, there are a couple of things that I feel like I've noticed, and I could be wrong about this because everybody has their own perception, but I really think the Saquon Barkley situation is going to have a very significant impact on how the ownership decides to move forward. My experience, owners hate to be embarrassed. They cannot abide that. They just can't do it. Look at Jerry Jones every time he's on the screen when the Cowboys are getting their asses kicked at home on national television. He's just seething. Like they can't stand that. Go back and look at what the Titans did after they traded away A.J. Brown, and A.J. Brown went and dropped like 200 yards and 3 touchdowns and whooped their ass. And I believe on national television as well. There are certain moments that whether or not it's right to make decisions based on one decision or something that didn't go your way, my experience is that owners in this league cannot stand to be laughed at by on a national scale, by the league, by the fan. Like they really hate it. And so whether it's right or not, I feel like what we saw in those behind the scenes clips and the before and the during and the after that situation, if Joe Shane's not back as the general manager, I wouldn't be surprised whether it's vocalized or not, that is the thing that broke it for the Mara family, is they could not abide letting him get out of the building, letting him go to Philly, for God's sakes, and do what he's doing this year while their team, wallows around in a 2-win season. That's the one that I think will make the difference, just based on my previous experience about how ownership makes these decisions. They can't stand to be embarrassed, and that's why I'd have to lean towards the house cleaning, because I think that moment really did make a big difference.
Planes flying over the stadium before games, begging for change doesn't help a whole lot either. But
That's what I mean. Like, it's that stuff. You'd love to say, when you talk about coaches or quarterbacks, or all they say, you got to have a thick skin, you got to do this, you got to do that. My experience, again, I could be wrong about this, but I've just seen too many instances where it was just clear owners cannot stand that stuff. They hate it, and they make decisions accordingly, in my experience.
absolutely. I have to ask you, our primary draft guy, Chris Flum. I don't know if you know Chris at all, but Chris did a mock this week, and it's an interesting scenario. Interesting scenario. And I know you only have two quarterbacks going in the first round. And we can argue, and I've made the argument that with better quarterback play, the Giants are what we kind of thought they would be, a 6-win team, 7-win team this year, something like that. But they have other holes. They have other needs, a lot of other things they need to do. Chris did a mock where, I don't, kind of for grins and kind of to fill out the roster, he traded down in the first round, first pick, second pick, second pick. He traded down. He ended up adding a couple of assets and taking Jalen Milroe, late in the top 10. I'm just curious what you think of Milroe, what you think of that scenario, and if Milroe, maybe with a bridge quarterback to give him a year to develop, is he a guy who falls in that, you could really find something here category for you?
Yeah, I think he's going to be one of the most interesting prospects in this class, assuming he does declare, which it feels like that's where things are leaning. I feel like he has got more upside than both of those two quarterbacks. And I don't say that lightly in terms of Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. I feel like Jalen Milroe has special, like Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels type of impact potential at the next level. The difference is he is not the passer that either of those two guys were when they came out in their drafts. Lamar Jackson was way better as a passer than a lot of people gave him credit for, and I wrote about it at the time. I was pissed off that he kept getting tabbed as this, run around and just chuck it type of guy who didn't know what he was doing. I tried so hard to bang that drum, and I'm glad to see people are finally figuring that out. But and Jaden Daniels the same way, which is why he went number 2 instead of 32 like Lamar did. Jalen Milroe is an absolute just firecracker as a runner. We know that he can gash defenses. He can take it to the house just like those other two guys can, and he has the arm talent. The traits are there. The ability is there. But man, he's just so inconsistent when it comes to accuracy and decision making and turning the ball over and making the right decisions, going to the right places down the field. That it's just it feels very much more like a Josh Allen pick. So to your point about whether or not Daboll and Shane stick around, Daboll in particular, because of his work with Josh Allen earlier in his career, and that's kind of what made him the hot guy, right? When he was hired, they may look at that and say, Josh Allen, Buffalo traded up to 7 in that draft to take Josh Allen, and it was still a very boomer bust pick in that class. Maybe they view Milroe as that guy where they're like, hey, he's got all the talent in the world. He can be that type of dynamic guy, and we're going to be able to develop him like we did with Josh Allen. I wouldn't be surprised to see that. I just think it's a very thin edge. I feel like Jalen Milroe could very much benefit from another year at the college level. I thought, especially because of the way things worked out with the playoff seeding, that maybe he might lean towards coming back just because he was pissed off that they didn't make the playoff and wanted to go back and have another shot, get another year in Kalen DeBoer's system, because we saw what Kalen DeBoer was able to do for Michael Penix Jr. during his 2 years at Washington and made him into a top 10 pick. So, I feel like I wish he would go back because I think he would benefit from the experience. But from a talent perspective, everything is there. I just feel like it's it's the type of pick that can get you a fat second contract, or it can get you fired real quick. And I'm interested to see the decision he makes. And I'm interested to see if he is a top 10 pick, which I would understand. I don't know whether I would make that pick, but I understand it. You've got to be patient and you got to give him the tools, because otherwise you're setting the kid up to fail, because he needs time, he needs refinement before he's ready to be that type of guy. Because again, you look at Jayden Daniels, you look at guys that have started 50 plus games in college football. Milroe is not at that stage yet in terms of his skill set. I mean, this is a guy who at the beginning of last season was not even starting. Like, they weren't even sure he was going to be the guy earlier in the season. If you remember that game against USF,
Right.
He didn't even play because they were like, I don't know, we're going to give these other two guys a shot. So, I mean, clearly, again, the talent is there. I feel like it's a risky pick, and I understand. I'm always team swing for the fences. If you believe a quarterback in particular is special, you got to take that swing. Because listen, if you take the wrong guy, they're going to fire you anyway. So take the guy who has the chance, and I felt this way about Lamar in that draft. Take the guy who has the chance to be special instead of taking the boring middle of the road. It goes back to what I said earlier about punting on 4th and 1 from the 39. It's like, if I make the wrong decisions, I'm going to get fired anyway. So I might as well take the guy that has a chance to be special. And if it doesn't work out, they're going to fire me as much as they would have fired me if I took the guy who ended up being mediocre. You know what I mean?
Do what Dan Campbell would do, basically.
I tell you what, I'm not much of a kneecap biter, but for most things, I am a Dan Campbell type of a decision maker. I like that.
I have to ask you before I let you go. We talked a lot about Malik Neighbors, and Malik Neighbors is special. Right. Malik Neighbors has put up some really good numbers despite, mediocre to bad quarterback play. Tyrone Tracy has kind of done the same. He's a heck of a player. Theoretically, you can make the argument that the Giants got in Tyrone Tracy exactly what they were hoping to get in a Barkley replacement. So, theoretically, philosophically, you can argue that their theory was right. But I want to keep this as at the number 6 pick. Neighbors is terrific, and he'll be better with better quarterback play. But the Giants get to face Michael Penix Jr. this week, making his first NFL start. The Giants had the opportunity to draft J.J. McCarthy, Michael Penix, or Bo Nix, and they didn't believe that one of those guys was their guy. They took Neighbors and they said, we'll punt, we'll try a year with Daniel, and we'll revisit this in a year. Did they make the right choice? Are they going to regret not taking J.J. McCarthy or Penix or Nix, one of those guys?
I mean, I definitely think they could. And again, it's hard to make those kinds of comparisons because of all the variables, right? All the variables at all these other teams and where they go and what they have to work with. And so what I look at is from right now, which we get to play hindsight, right? That's what, right now, the Giants are in position to take either Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. And from where I'm sitting now, they are very much graded in the same range that I had all three of those quarterbacks you just mentioned, right? I had Drake May and Jayden Daniels and Caleb Williams all in the top 10 overall on my board. And everybody else was like 30 and lower, right? In terms of those next three guys that all went in the top 12. So if you're telling me now that we get to with hindsight, my deal is, I get to take, Michael Penix Jr. or J.J. McCarthy or Bo Nix at 6. And then this year, I probably am not picking 1 or 2 because the quarterback play has probably been at least a little bit better. So I'm in the 5 to 10 range, and I'm taking, Will Johnson from Michigan if I want a corner. If I need a receiver, maybe I'm getting Ted McMillan from Arizona. Do I like that better than being able to take Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward and knowing I already have Malik Neighbors? I don't know that there's a better option, and it's hard to because of the variables. But here's what I know: Malik Neighbors is a stud. Malik Neighbors is already, I think, one of the most talented, best receivers in the league. And now I get to have my pick at the top of the draft of these quarterbacks that are comparable to the ones I was able to choose from last year, and particularly with regards to experience in terms of Penix and Nix in particular. Not McCarthy because he's the younger, more inexperienced guy, but you also get to choose between two quarterbacks that have played a lot of football at the college level. They're not very raw when it comes to those sorts of things. They've got a lot of experience in Ward and Sanders. And so you're going to get an experienced starting quarterback at the top of the draft. You've already got a guy that you know is a stud wide receiver. It's hard for me to say I'd rather have it the other way. I'll put it that way. It's hard for me to be able to choose, oh, let me take Penix Jr. And now, obviously, if he drops 3 bills and 5 TDs on him on Sunday, it's going to be hard to swallow that. But it's just, I feel like you can make a strong case either way. And I don't want to be too, wishy-washy about this, but it's like, it would be hard if it's me to put, it feels like taking points off the board. It feels like taking a field goal off the board because you got a penalty and then you're risking not getting any points at all. You know what you have in Malik Neighbors. You have an opportunity to get a comparable, in my opinion, quarterback prospect at the top of the draft. I feel like it'd be hard for me to take that off the board and say, nah, I want this quarterback and I want to take a receiver in this draft who might not be what Malik Neighbors is. I feel like it'd be hard for me to willingly give him up at this point.
Oh, it's an interesting debate, interesting question, and we'll see. We'll probably know in a couple of years how it all works out. Anyway, Luke, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for the insight. Why don't you just let folks know where they can find your work, where they can find you on social media if they don't already know?
Yeah, man. Pretty simple on Twitter. I'm at Luke Easterling. Over there at Blue Sky as well. Same, whatever the Luke Easterling dot Blue Sky, whatever I'm still getting used to that one. I'm still figuring it
as
out.
as am I. As am I.
But yeah, athlonsports.com is where you can find all our stuff. Right now, I'm kind of neck deep in writing scouting reports for the NFL Draft Preview magazine that'll be out probably late February. So that's just one of my favorite projects I get to work on. Growing up doing this type of work and buying that magazine every year, and now the fact that I get to write a good bit of the content in there, it's such a fun experience for me. I really enjoy doing that. But I've got some fun stuff on the website. I've written a couple features in the last couple of weeks. I got to sit down with Eric Crouch, the old Nebraska quarterback, Heisman Trophy winner. We got to talk about, his glory days, but also the way the sport has changed. And it was interesting to get his perspective on NIL and what he could have experienced and what he where he thinks the sport is going. I had a chance to sit down with Dan Marino last week and kind of do the same thing, go over his glory days, talk about players he played with. He was lobbying for a couple of his guys to get in the Hall of Fame. Talked about advice he would have for some young quarterbacks. Just some really fun stuff in there from Dan. Every week I have a new mock draft at athlonsports.com. Every Thursday morning there's a fresh one there. So definitely head over there. You can see all my work in the meantime, and then just get ready for that magazine to hit newsstands leading up to the draft.
We'll be looking forward to that. And hey, tell Marino I know a team that could use a quarterback for the next couple of weeks.
Hey, he was very clear in that feature. You can see it that he wishes he could play now, but wouldn't give up the fact that he played then. He just wants to keep playing forever, just like in that commercial.
All right, Luke, thank you very, very much. Giants fans, thank you as always for watching. Please stay safe out there, take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.